Hello, this is the second video, second of three, on solving quadratic equations that have irrational solutions. We're going to do it two different ways. The first one is solve by taking the square root. This is something that we've done in the last unit, but now they're going to be irrational solutions. All right, so let's look at a couple of quick examples. 3x squared minus 36 equals 0. Just like before, we want to isolate the x squared. We want to get that guy by itself. So I'm going to add 36 and I get 3x squared equals 36. Divide by 3, divide by 3, and I get x squared equals 12. This is no different than what we did in the last unit, but now 12, a result of this operation, these operations, is not a perfect square. So this is where it becomes different. We're going to take the square root of both sides. Remember, plus and minus. So now I have x squared equals, that would be x equals plus or minus the square root of 12. 12 has a perfect square factor of 4. 12 is 4 times 3. And the square root of 4 is 2. So my answer is x equals plus or minus 2 square root of 3. The plus and minus is in front. This means 2 square root of 3 and negative 2 square root of 3. But all we have to write is this. All right, let's look at one more example. Quantity x minus 2 squared, quantity x minus 2 squared equals 48. Since my binomial that's being squared is already isolated, I just take the square root of both sides, plus minus, and I get x minus 2 equals plus or minus the square root of 48. 48 is 16 times 5. So we have x minus 2 equals plus or minus 4 radical 5. And now it's going to look a little bit different. We're going to add 2 to both sides, plus 2 plus 2. So we have x equals 2 plus or minus 4 square root of 5. This is my final answer, or I could write it 2 plus 4 square root of 5 and 2 minus 4 square root of 5. I prefer the first one. It's less writing. All right, this is taking the square root of both sides, which is what we did in the last unit, so it should seem very familiar to you. The next part is solving by squaring. Solving by squaring both sides. This happens when you have an equation with a square root. For instance, square root of x equals 5. Anytime we have a square root, these are equations with square roots, equation with a radical, or square root. we want to isolate the radical. And then we square both sides. Square both sides. So, if we have a radical, you get the radical by itself, isolate, and then you square both sides. So, to square both sides, you must use parentheses around the radical. Without the parentheses, it has no mathematical meaning. You must use parentheses. We square this, we get x. Square this, we get 25. And we're done. Kind of simple. All right, let's look at another one. We have -5 plus the square root of 2x plus 3 equals 0. I add 5 to both sides. I get the square root of 2x plus 3 equals 5. I have isolated my radical, and now I square both sides. Repeating, of course, you must have parentheses. And I get 2x plus 3 equals 25, and then I solve this equation. -3 minus 3, 2x equals 22, divide by 2, divide by 2, x equals 11. All right, pretty straightforward. Isolate the radical, square both sides. Now, if you have a problem with two radicals, square root of 2x plus 3 equals square root of 3x minus 1, 3x minus 1. We again isolate the radical. I have a radical by itself. In other words, one on each side. And then I square both sides. Again, you must show this work. This is showing your work. And you must use parentheses. If you don't use parentheses, I'm going to hand the assignment back. You must use parentheses. All right, we square both sides. We get 2x plus 3 equals 3x minus 1. I'm going to subtract 2x. I'm going to add 1 to both sides. And I get 4 equals x. And I'm done. I've solved the equation by squaring both sides. So, your next assignment, you're going to have problems where you have to take the square root and you isolate the thing being squared, whether it's x. Let's see here. Whether it's x, you isolate the x squared, or whether it's a binomial being squared, you have to isolate that. If the equation has a radical, you isolate the radical. Over here, my radical was isolated. The fact that I had one on each side means they were both isolated. And then we square this each side and solve the equation. All right. Hope this all makes sense to you. It's really a topic that is not all that complicated, unlike some. All right. Enjoy and have a great day.